The Nordic Passport Union allows citizens of the Nordic countries Iceland, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Finland to travel and reside in another Nordic country without any travel documentation or a residence permit. Since the 25th of March 2001, all 5 states have also been within the Schengen area. The Faroe Islands are part of the Nordic Passport Union but not the Schengen area, while Greenland and Svalbard are outside both. However, Greenland has an open border with all Nordic countries, and allows Nordic citizens to enter, settle and work without requiring a passport or permits. Svalbard allows Nordic citizens to settle and work without permits, as a result of the Svalbard Treaty. However, with the exception of Norwegian citizens, valid travel documentation is required to enter Svalbard. Furthermore, as citizens of a Nordic country, those from Svalbard and Greenland are permitted to reside in any other Nordic country. Nordic citizens are generally treated like local citizens in all these countries, in particular for travel purposes. For Nordic citizens, no identity documentation is legally required to enter or reside in any Nordic country. However, identity documentation is still useful, as companies may require proof of identity for certain services, such as trains, airports, and age check for alcohol purchase. Usually any valid proof of identity is accepted, such as a driver license. For services aimed at residents, like banking, picking up postal packages or dealing with authorities, sometimes only local identity documentation, along with passports and national identity cards, are accepted. Similar to the Nordic Passport Union, the Common Travel Area allows Irish and British citizens to travel between Ireland and the United Kingdom without travel documentation, and each country generally accords the same rights to citizens of either country. Establishment. The Nordic Passport Union was established in 3 stages. In 1952, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Finland agreed to abolish passports for travel between them and to readmit citizens of other countries who had entered illegally into one of the 4 countries from another. On the 1st of July 1954, the agreement was extended to allow citizens to reside and work in any of the 4 countries without a residence or work permit. Iceland joined the agreement on the 1st of December 1955. Passport checks for citizens of non-member countries at the borders between member countries were removed by a treaty between Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Finland signed on the 12th of July 1957 and which came into force on the 1st of May 1958. The treaty was extended to Iceland on the 24th of September 1965 and to the Faroe Islands on the 1st of January 1966. Greenland and Svalbard remain outside the Passport Union. Nordic countries and Schengen. In December 1996, the 2 non-EU member states, Norway and Iceland, signed an association agreement with the signatories of the Schengen Agreement to become part of the Schengen area. While this agreement never came into force, both countries did become part of the Schengen area after concluding similar agreements with the EU. The Schengen Convention itself was not open for signature by non-EU member states. For the 25th of March 2001, the Schengen Acquis applied to the area of the Nordic Passport Union with the exception of the Faroe Islands. Border checkpoints have been removed within the Schengen area, in addition to those that had been abolished previously within the Nordic Passport Union. In the case of the Faroe Islands, which are not part of the Schengen area but remain part of the Nordic area, the strict Schengen rules rules applied to travelers from the Faroe Islands into the Schengen area, including the Nordic countries. But the Nordic rules allowing for an open border apply to those going the other way from the Nordic countries, but not necessarily from the other Schengen countries. However, citizens of the Nordic Passport Union countries enjoy extra rights within the Nordic area, not available under Schengen, such as less paperwork if moving to a different Nordic country, and fewer requirements for naturalization or citizenship. Within the Nordic area, any Nordic identity documentation is valid as proof of identity for Nordic citizens because of the Nordic Passport Union, while a national identity card or a passport can be required in other Schengen countries. Most Scandinavian people do not own any Schengen-approved national ID card, so they need a passport when visiting most Schengen countries outside the Nordic area. Although some Schengen countries allow EEA citizens to enter without a national identity card or passport, such as Germany. Before 2001, full customs checks were required for ferry travel when traveling from Denmark to other Nordic countries. There was no land border with Denmark before July 2000 when the Øresund Bridge was opened, which had relaxed customs check from the start. Nordic citizens did not need to be in possession of a passport, but a passport could be useful for those not natively speaking a Scandinavian language or people looking non-Nordic. Other citizens needed a passport as a part of the customs check, at least when arriving from Denmark and non-Nordic countries. Every car driver was asked about where they had been, and suspicious people were subject to further checks. For land and ferry travel into Denmark and between Sweden, Norway and Finland, there were much more relaxed customs and passport checks, and often no checks at all. For air travel, there were full passport and customs checks, even though verbally claiming Nordic citizenship with a Scandinavian language, plus showing the ticket for the intra-Nordic flight or any Nordic identity documentation was usually enough to pass the passport check. It happened that Nordic citizens without a passport were not allowed to pass until a thorough identity investigation had been made, usually for people looking non-Nordic. Passengers traveling by public transport, such as train or air, were usually not interviewed by the customs control. From March 2001, the Schengen rules have given more relaxed customs checks from Denmark, including no passport checks at airports, since intra-Schengen travelers have separated from the travelers from outside the Schengen area. In November 2015, Sweden introduced temporary border controls and requirements for all international airlines and ferries to check identity documents due to the European migrant crisis. For the 4th of January 2016, Sweden requires carriers to perform identity checks on the Danish side of the Denmark-Sweden border, while still keeping the border controls on the Swedish side. For this, a passport or a Nordic driver's license is needed. A national ID card from EU countries can be used, but few Nordic citizens have them. Agreements. Abolition of passport for Nordic citizens. The protocol concerning the abolition of passports for travel between Sweden, Denmark, Finland and Norway was signed on the 14th of July 1952 in Stockholm. This protocol was implemented by the individual but concurrent decisions of the four governments. It abolished the need for citizens of the four countries to carry a passport when traveling in the three other countries, provided that the trip was for such a short time that a residence permit was not necessary. The agreement could be revoked in case of war, danger of war, or extraordinary international and national circumstances. On the 26th of July 2014, the Norwegian police for the first time suspended this agreement due to a perceived terrorist threat. Re-Admittance of Aliens. The agreement for the Re-Admittance of Aliens was signed on the 14th of July 1952 in Stockholm. The agreement provides that any alien, i.e., persons not citizens of the Nordic countries, having illegally entered one of the Nordic countries directly from another Nordic country should be readmitted by the country, unless that person has stayed at least a year in the country or has received either a residence or work permit, exemption of passport or residence permit. The protocol concerning the exemption of nationals of Denmark, Finland, Norway and Sweden from the obligation to have a passport or residence permit while resident in a Nordic country other than their own, was signed on the 22nd of May 1954 in Copenhagen. The protocol was implemented by individual but concurrent decisions by the governments of each of the countries and can be revoked in case of war, danger of war, or other extraordinary international and national circumstances. The protocol provides that citizens of the Nordic countries can travel without passport or other travel documentation to any other Nordic country. Citizens of the Nordic countries can reside without residence permit in any other Nordic country. Police authorities in the Nordic countries shall make all necessary information available to ascertain a person's identity and citizenship in a Nordic country. Removal of passport checks at the internal Nordic borders. The agreement between Denmark, Finland, Norway and Sweden to remove passport control at the internal Nordic borders was signed on the 12th of July 1957 in Copenhagen and came into force on the 1st of May 1958. This agreement removed all passport checks at the internal Nordic borders, and required the Nordic countries to uphold passport control at the external borders. Aliens with residence permits are allowed to stay up to 3 months in other Nordic countries, except for seeking employment or conducting business. Aliens who are denied entry into one Nordic country should also be denied entry into the other Nordic countries. The Nordic countries are also obliged to readmit aliens that should have been denied entry at the first point of entry.